share some of the work I do with you from the general church level, and I've shared some of these facts with you in bits and pieces previously. And I will continue to share them as important facts as we go along. But I think that these statistics and pieces of information are important today as we actually talk about the idea of joy. First, as I've mentioned over and over, the current studies show that 1 out of every 10 youth will not be in church after leaving high school. Children and youth are said to need at least 5 adults. Sometimes this number includes parents and sometimes it does not, to know how to be and remain a faithful adult. 1 in 5 teens say they only trust their parents. And while they only trust their parents, sometimes this is also where their greatest sense of mistrust comes from. The fastest growing religious group in America is known as the nuns, and they're not Catholic nuns, they're just ones who, when they are asked on a survey, what is your religious affiliation, they mark nuns. Teens who go to church camp are 3 times more likely to stay in church as adults. Thanks, I love the high five from the 4th row. 62% of parents say they would switch churches in order for their teen to participate in a program that they would enjoy. Most teenagers have deep feelings of abandonment and stress that make it very difficult for them to trust anyone, especially adults. Therefore, they turn away from adults, rebel as we call it, and create their own underground subculture to survive. This happens over a 15-year period because adolescence is now estimated to last until about 25 years old. And that is also when your brain becomes fully developed. Research shows that these last 2 shifts began in our country within the 1960s and have had the most effect on those who were born basically in the late 70s and after. Generation X, Millennials, and Generation Z, or whatever they will end up being called as we label and categorize mass groups of people. No matter how good your youth leader, your pastor, your minister at a church, the odds of staying faithful into adulthood are most directly related to what happens in your home. Are any of you wondering why I would share these statistics during Advent on the day of joy? I mean, out of all the Advent topics, hope, peace, joy, love, and Christ, I do think that joy, while maybe not the most complicated to discuss, is the most complicated to talk about. You see, we know and learned over time that hope comes from a deep want. We know that peace comes from a struggle, overcoming what is wrong. But joy, what profound movement leads us to joy? Real joy. Not joy that is a sugar-coated Hallmark moment or movie. Not that happiness and giddiness that is fleeting, but joy, real joy, something deeper and different. The reality is, I don't think that many people in today's world actually know joy. I think this fact alone may be one of the main reasons people do not find the church necessary anymore. And with all the information and statistics above, I think that most people in a lot of different generations feel lonely. Parents feel lonely, singles feel misplaced, grandparents feel useless and unheard, and how do children and teenagers feel? Abandoned. And I don't think this happened on purpose, but something we must recognize over the past 60 years shifted, and we, the church are not doing our job if we do not notice that something changed. And within this change, joy, real joy, seemed to have gotten a little lost. Or maybe even a lot. So the question I have for you and for myself and for everyone this Christmas season is, do you know joy? Real joy. Do you know that joy? Do you know that real joy through your faith? Would you even know what that real joy felt like or looked like? Strangely, one of the most joy-filled moments of my year was when my aunt was taking her last breath. I stood with my arms wrapped around my younger cousins, ages 15 and 18. I held them next to me as they watched their grandma go. I remember holding them, and my sister was standing on the other side. Here we were again. It wasn't a happy time. It was definitely not a peaceful time. But strangely enough, in this moment, there was a sense of joy. There was this deep connectedness to those on this earth and a knowledge of what lies beyond. There was a spirit within that room that was moving with deep love, and there was joy. And it wasn't an easy joy. It was a very difficult joy as my aunt was leaving this world to move on to one where those like my mother could bring her greater joy. But as I had my arms around these two young women, as they stood next to me, I did start to think about the fact that these two women will be with me throughout my life and in the future. There will be other deaths when we are standing next to each other because we will be losing people we love. At the same time, there will be other births, there will be weddings, there will be graduations. And there may even come a point where they are standing with my children and other family members and their children, maybe even their grandchildren. If I live long enough, they will be standing next to my bed, holding each other, having a deep sense of love and joy when I transition out of this world. Joy is so often something we try to create, but real joy stands next to the moments that may terrify us the most. Real joy stands next to the moments where we are forced to discover a strength and connectedness that can overcome the darkness and isolation and the hurt that so much of our world is filled with. This quote says, "The walls we build around us keep the sadness out, but we also see that it keeps out the joy." Well, our brains are complicated, and our hearts and our bodies and our souls are just this mixed up thing. So think about how teenagers, whose brains are not actually formed until they're 25 years old, are able to connect to their impulse response. Studies actually show that if you give a young adult time to actually think through something a little longer, they will find a better and less impulsive response. But of course, in a world where they are so busy and stressed out, they are trying to figure out their identity, their expectations, we seem to demand from them something that's beyond even what we can do, and we wonder why so many young people are angry, impulsive, hurting, emotional, and feel lost, and we feel lost with them. We wonder why teens, and then even many of our young adults and millennials and just people in general, don't want to directly communicate with each other, because it makes all of us feel way too vulnerable. We cut off the ways to be both susceptible to hurt, and at the same time when we do that, we cut off the ways to know real joy. And we cut off ways to know real joy through Jesus Christ and to God. We instead live in a world where we try to fit into certain images and instead don't take time to know ourselves, pray for ourselves, and recognize ourselves as worthy and beloved children of God. That means we, as a community and as a church, are called to find ways to overcome the walls that have been built. We must find ways to build trust. If we are ever to get back to actual joy, we must find ways to engage from the youngest child to the youth, to the young adult, to the grandparent. We must find ways to work all together and experience love and joy and peace and hope together. Have you ever noticed that the multitude of singing angels, did not actually convince the shepherds that what was happening was true? That these young boys and second sons who are out in the field isolated from everyone did not actually stay in the field with this newfound revelation. That they only began to believe and really understand what was happening when they went to participate in this newfound glory. They all of a sudden, while they were a little nervous and scared and told not to be afraid, it wasn't that they were told to stay out in the field. They were invited into the experience and to all of a sudden be able to go to Bethlehem and engage in the revelation of this new birth and this new child. When I say this Advent season that the story is enough, it does not mean that the hearing of the story is always enough, even though sometimes it's what we need. It does not mean that the sharing of the story is always enough, even though that's a piece of it too. The story is only enough when you are able to use your theological imagination. Your theological imagination in a way to be able, like children can, to see yourself as part of the story. To recognize that the shepherds in many ways are like the teenagers we know. To remind ourselves that we all, at all stages and ages and experience, are able to have a place in the story that makes all of us, even today, a part of the story that is worthy of celebration. The teenagers of our time are not supposed to be separated out into the fields. They're supposed to be gathered with us in whatever our roles are, whether it be the parents, the innkeepers, the magi, whatever role we're called to be at this time, that we are all called to continue to be in this story, and that it is only with the participation of everyone that the story is able to be not only enough, but more. At that point, trust can be built. And the greatest joy, the deepest joy, the most profound and loving and needed joy that can only be the joy that is known in a hurting world can be present and seen. Let us remember that joy is good news that brings a light in the darkness that the darkness cannot overcome. So do not be afraid, but instead be willing, be open to knowing that you are enough to be part of the experience of real joy.